Good evening. My name is Michael Hunter Schwartz, and I am the 10th Dean of McGeorge. Welcome to the 7th Annual Legislative Speaker Series event. Prior speakers have included Senators Wiener, Pan, Limon, Allen, and Ashby, and we are thrilled that you are here. My only task, other than welcoming you, is saying just a few words about Erin O'Neill, and I have a feeling that I'll probably say more words than she would want me to say, but I'm going to say them anyway. I have a new working theory about her. There are two Erin O'Neills, because there's like one that she's got locked up in a closet that's doing a whole bunch of extra work while she's doing all the other things that she does for McGeorge. You sort of like just add up all the things that she does. It's absolutely impossible for her to do those. So, and what does that mean for McGeorge? Well, let me start with what the key thing about that it means. It means #1 in the nation for government law. You should applaud that, yes. Why are we #1? Well, we were never #1 before Erin O'Neill became the director of our Capitol Center. So I would hypothesize that we are #1 because Erin O'Neill has done such a fabulous job. And for those of you who have her as a professor, you also know that she isn't just a great leader of our Capitol Center. She's also a phenomenal teacher, a great moot court coach. Again, more than a real human can do. And of course, she was the person who launched this series and allows us to get access for our students and our community to important leaders in the policy space. And so with that, I will get out of the way of Erin O'Neill. Please join me in welcoming her to the control of the room.
Thank you so much, Dean Schwartz. That was quite an introduction. The truth is I have a time turner like Hermione in Harry Potter. No, I am motivated to do so many things at McGeorge because I care so deeply about this community. I am from Sacramento originally. I worked in the legislature before I went to law school, so many things about the Capitol Center and teaching advocacy are things that truly speak to my heart. I love to see you all here. Thank you so much for being here this evening. Thank you, Dean Schwartz, for your support. It's great to see so many of our Capitol Center alumni board members in the audience. And as Dean Schwartz mentioned, I am Professor Erin O'Neill. I'm the director of the Capitol Center for Law and Policy here at McGeorge and our Capitol Lawyering Concentration, which is a program of study for students who are interested in working at the intersection of law and public policy. And it's wonderful to see students, alumni. I see so many friendly faces here this evening, and we are just thrilled to have Assemblymember Matt Haney here to join us this evening for, as the Dean said, our 7th annual Capitol Center Legislative Lecture Series, or Legislative Leaders Speaker Series. And to introduce Assemblymember Haney, I would like to welcome to the podium the president of our Capitol Lawyering Association for Students, Taylor Gonzalez.
Thank you, Professor O'Neill, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening for a conversation with Assemblymember Matt Haney focusing on homelessness, housing, and hope for urban revitalization. My name is Taylor Gonzalez, and I'm the president of the Capitol Lawyering Association for Students here at McGeorge. When Professor O'Neill first asked me to introduce the Assemblymember this evening, I felt deeply honored, but was also very excited as I remember working in the Assembly back in 2021 when he won his special election to serve California's 17th Assembly District. He quickly won over his fellow members and their staff with his dedication both on the Assembly floor and on the legislative softball field. Assemblymember Haney quickly proved himself as a leader in the Assembly, taking on critical issues such as the opioid crisis and the housing crisis. In just his first full year, he successfully sent 12 bills to Governor Newsom that were ultimately chaptered into law. And if you're wondering, yes, that's an impressive figure for even a veteran member, let alone one in just his first year. But Assemblymember Haney's background has provided him with a foundation to thrive in the state legislature. Prior to his election to the State Assembly, he served on the San Francisco Board of Supervisors from 2018 to 2022 and on the San Francisco Board of Education from 2013 to 2018. He also holds a BA in Urban Development from UC Berkeley, an MA from Stanford University's School of Education, a JD from Stanford Law School, and an LLM in Human Rights from the National University of Ireland. Currently in the Assembly, he serves as the Assembly's Majority Whip and the chair of the Fentanyl, Opioid Addiction and Overdose Protection Select Committee, chair of the Downtown Recovery Select Committee, chair of the Renters Caucus, the co-chair of the Irish Caucus, and a member of the Local Government Organization, Health, Judiciary, and Appropriations Committees. So he's quite busy, to say the least. Assemblymember Haney is an incredibly dedicated public servant, and we are very fortunate that he has taken time from his busy schedule to join us this evening. Please join me in welcoming Assemblymember Matt Haney to McGeorge.
Thank you, Caleb. So we will get the conversation kicked off this evening by asking you what drew you to public service and working in the public interest.
Well, thank you so much for that kind introduction, and thank you to the Dean and the Capital Lawyering Student Association and all of you for coming. It's really an honor to be here. I'm glad you didn't tell that full softball story. That was very kind of you. I made history, and there's every year there is a softball game between legislators, and every year somebody gets hurt. And I don't know why, Ken, my former colleague, I don't know why we continue to have that game, knowing that literally there are members who can't show up to vote because we know that they're going to get injured in that game. And I was the member that year who actually, I think, made history by being the only person that anyone can find in medical records who dislocated his hip by swinging the bat too hard. Literally happened. So I'm fine, thankfully, but my first year in the legislature, the last couple of votes, I was going around whipping votes for those 12 bills on crutches, but maybe it got me some sympathy votes. But it's an honor to be here. This is such a wonderful institution, and I know from working in the Capitol, not only as a legislator, but before as a legislative aide, that the Capitol could not operate without McGeorge students and alumni. It's really an essential part of how we operate as a state and as a Capitol community, so it's an honor to be invited to come here. How I got involved in politics, I grew up in the Bay Area, was raised in a household mostly with my mom and my sister. We moved, I think, about 14 times before I got to high school, but all in and around the Bay Area. Most of that was to different apartment buildings, or some of them very large, some of them in different communities where I was brand new there. And so I think that was where I first kind of got some of the skills that I would later use in politics, because I had to get along with everybody or I'd probably get beaten up. This is something that folks who move around a lot, especially when you're smaller than everyone else, you have to learn how to connect with people. You have to learn how to fit in. You have to come to understand different communities and how to build connections and relationships with people. So that was kind of my first sort of entree into just being in community as a leader. But it was also, I think, a way that I saw a lot of the problems that later I wanted to go on and try to address. I saw friends of mine who were kicked out of school, suspended, and some of them ended up into juvenile hall or in prison, and saw firsthand the school-to-prison pipeline. I saw poverty in different parts of the Bay Area and the disparate ways that it affected different communities. And so as my career went on, I really wanted to find ways to try to confront those issues, to address them, to seek more justice and fairness in the world, and to make the community that I was a part of a better place, particularly for people that I knew firsthand. And so that was a goal that I had. I didn't know that it would lead me to become a state assembly member representing San Francisco. I came first after I graduated from college. My first really introduction to politics was as a state Senate fellow in the Capital Fellowship, and we share that. I learned that many of the things that I was most concerned about, or that I had seen that were broken in the communities that I had grown up in, were being determined here in Sacramento. the school system, the juvenile justice system, the prison system, the healthcare system. All of these things, even though the state legislature is often probably the third most visible of the levels of government when people talk about it or it's in the media, this, I think, is the place where the most important, impactful decisions are made. So that was my first introduction. Many years later, ended up coming back here, but I think I came to find that elected office was a way that I could ensure that more people who were often left out of decision-making could be at the table, and that I could fight for their voices and experiences to be included, and that I could make our institutions, whether it was schools, where I started on the school board, our systems around homelessness or housing or healthcare, which I worked a lot in local government, or all of the issues that I get to work on now are more reflective of people's experiences, more representative of their needs and voices, and hopefully the outcomes are a bit fairer as well. So that's what brought me to do it, and so far I'm enjoying it.
Sure. So you've talked a little bit about how your experience growing up informed your decision to run for public office and some of the things you think about. When you got to the building as an elected assembly member, how did you choose your policy priorities? Kind of how did your perspective get shaped on the issues you wanted to forward at that time? Because obviously you've mentioned a lot of really important community-based issues, and you necessarily have to pick and choose when you set up your legislative package. Well,
I tried to look for areas where there was both a huge need, areas where I had seen firsthand the challenges and crises and really lack of response that needed to be there from government, and also areas where there was some opportunity for us to put forward solutions where we could actually make a difference. The first issue that I really took on when I got to the legislature for that reason was the issue of the fentanyl epidemic. This is the most deadly public health and public safety epidemic that's facing our state. It's killing over 10,000 people a year in our state from drug overdoses. That's double the number that died of drug overdoses just 6 or 7 years ago. It is a number that has skyrocketed, and one that I knew firsthand, having come from San Francisco, where we were seeing over 700 overdoses in our city each year. That's compared to about 40 or 50 homicides. Just an astronomical number of people, over 2 a day, who are dying of this crisis. And so I think the state really still, unfortunately, but certainly a few years ago, was not treating this with the level of urgency and at the scale that it was being experienced in communities all over the state. This isn't just a San Francisco problem. Every single state, every single county in our state is experiencing this fentanyl epidemic, and it's one that's increased throughout the state. So I wanted to come up here and try to break through some of the sort of ways in which this crisis often ended up being a political football. Sure. And people just went into their corners, lock up drug dealers or do full-on harm reduction and have everybody go into a safe injection site. That was sort of where the corners that people went to, and I really felt that there was a huge amount of space for us to confront this challenge with real solutions where we should actually have broad agreement, because this is something that shouldn't be a political issue. This isn't a partisan issue. So we were able to, in my first year, put forward a number of bills around access to treatment, so helping people actually get off of these deadly drugs and getting them care, reducing barriers to treatment, making sure young people had access to it, learning from what other states and countries were doing. And so, I think that when you come into the legislature, you sort of look around and go, who else is working on this? Are they working on it in a way that's really reflective of what's going on? And are they working on it with the urgency and at the scale that we need it to make a real difference? Not just, tinkering, but something like the fentanyl epidemic deserves as big of solutions as the crisis we were facing and are facing. And so that's what I've tried to bring, and also to bring people together on it. Starting a bipartisan conversation around this issue, I think, was very important to me, and listening to people who were directly impacted. So there were many other issues that I have gone on to focus on while I was there, but that was the one that I dove into first.
Absolutely, and as you mentioned, seeing the actual impact on the ground and having that inform your policy perspective and realizing that the need to form consensus around the problem versus taking positions and kind of dividing the vote and dividing the ideological parties, viewing a place where people can come together and find actual solutions to the problem. So, viewing your district and the state of California, what do you see as the biggest policy priorities right now for California, and how do those line up or not with your district in San Francisco?
I think, sometimes my district, what's been interesting is I have a very unique district. I have probably the most urban district in the state, the most dense district in the state. I represent about 60% of San Francisco, the east side of San Francisco. It is a district that is solely the city and county of San Francisco, which I'm actually the only legislator that represents only one city. All of the other legislators, Assembly and Senate, represent some set of cities, even in Los Angeles. They mix with other cities. So I have one city, a totally urban district. But what's been interesting for me in coming to the legislature is, even though most of my colleagues obviously don't represent as urban areas, most represent suburban areas, rural areas, maybe some bit of urban. I actually think most of the issues that we're facing are very similar across the state. The residents that I represent, they want to be able to buy a home. They want to be able to afford a home and not have rent be 50, 60% of their income. They want to make a bit more money and have their kids go to good schools. They want to be safe. So all of these things are just kind of take on a different maybe flavor when you have such an urban district. But I think that for me, coming in from the experience that I've had and what I saw in San Francisco, I have been foremost concerned with, I think, the level of inequality that we have in our state and the social problems that can create and the problems that it creates for people in their lives. San Francisco is one of the richest places to ever exist in the world in terms of the number of billionaires, the median income, all of that. And yet you go there and you see people, including everywhere around where I live, by the dozens, by the hundreds, living on the street, using drugs and dying of fentanyl, deep poverty. People who work there in most of the jobs that you have in downtown San Francisco are actually not making enough to even live there. So policy solutions that can close that gap so that people can actually make enough money and have enough access to the things that all of us need to thrive as human beings, housing, healthcare, again, a well enough paying and high skilled job so that they can provide for themselves. These are things that I really sought to tackle and I think are fundamentally for every Californian what they're worried about. They're not making enough to do the things they need to do for them and their families, and that creates tremendous strain on people in their lives. And so for me, that's also been largely the issue of housing, because for most Californians, when they think of affordability, housing is number one. Californians pay more of their income in rent or mortgage than anywhere else in the country. We have the lowest homeownership rates. The insecurity that comes with how much people have to pay for housing and how little access they have to ownership in housing is, I think, the number one issue in the community that I represent, and I think continues to be the biggest issue for Californians in this moment, and has only, I think, gotten more challenging.
Certainly, yes. So I know you've done some work in this area. Can you tell us about your biggest legislative accomplishment so far and your biggest challenge, what you consider to be both of those?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge, I think, I'll start there, is we've got to build millions more homes in California, and we have to do it very quickly. And we, as I said, homes in California are about twice the national average. And so it's out of reach for many Californians, and that's reflected also in what renters experience. So building a lot more homes very, very, very quickly is challenging in the situation, in the structure we have of governance, because we've given these decisions in large part to local governments and cities and counties, to decide what gets to go where, if anything at all. And so partly because of that, we have created a situation where most of our state is off limits to multifamily housing, to apartment buildings. We've had situations, of course, where cities basically ban any new housing at all. And so creating a situation where the state is intervening and challenging this dynamic so that we can build a lot quicker is the biggest challenge that we have, particularly in the context of who's going to do it and how are we going to pay for it. Is the state going to pay for it ourselves? Are we willing to do that, and how much? And if not, how do we make sure that the private sector is actually able to do that, and that's a good investment for them? So we're constantly trying to, and now just at the beginning of this year, my committee assignments changed a little bit. I'm now the chair of the Housing Committee, and I took that on in January. The day after I became chair of Housing, the fires hit Los Angeles, and we lost over 15,000 structures there, and the challenges that we had not only to ensure housing access for people in Los Angeles, but also the ripple effects of that for insurance prices, for where we can build safely, I think have really exploded. I have taken on a number of issues related to making it easier to build housing. I passed a bill last year that we're pushing again this year around making it by right, so lowering all barriers to be able to convert empty office spaces to housing. In our downtown San Francisco, we've got nearly 40% vacancies in our offices, and many of those could be converted to housing. And right now, it's really hard to do that. It takes a long time. Got to go through all this red tape, all these extra costs. That has been a big priority to make it easier for me to do that. I also passed a bill which was one of the, I think, more important tenant bills in the legislature in the last few years, which capped the security deposits that a landlord can charge at 1 month of rent. And what we were seeing in San Francisco and in many parts of the state is basically had to have the equivalent of a down payment on a home in anywhere else in the country in order to just move into an apartment. 2 months of rent plus the first month you're paying, if it was the average rent, over $10,000 just to move into an apartment. So we capped that, and that was, I think, something that I've continued to do, which is, yes, we have to build a lot more housing quicker, but we also have to address these challenges that both homeowners and renters are experiencing right now around affordability.
Absolutely. So you mentioned your role as chair of the Assembly Housing Committee, and I have to say I looked up the date because I was curious to know how it intersected with the wildfires and to see that it was literally right before the wildfires occurred. Yeah. So that would be a busy committee under any circumstances in California. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience there, the kinds of bills and issues that you're facing, and just what it's like to be the chair of such a high-profile committee at this moment in time?
Well, so we've had over 100 Assembly bills related to housing that are going to come to my committee, already introduced. There is, I think, already just a tremendous urgency to get more housing built quicker and to address this affordability crisis that was already there. Now, on top of that, we've got to devote a tremendous amount of resources to get these communities rebuilt. And I went down there and have been working with folks in Los Angeles to make sure we can do that quicker. But then there's all these other questions that have come up, because sadly we don't believe that this is going to be the only fire and only disaster that we're going to see in the near term. This, unfortunately, may be something that we see on a very regular basis. So what does that mean for where we can build, about how do we ensure some of the plans that we had around density of building in certain areas? So now we're looking at this thinking, all right, we've got all these additional challenges, and you could look at it as just all of the challenges kind of stacking up and just look at it and go, this is impossible. But for me, I'm trying to work with folks to see, how do we actually identify the real opportunities here? As I said, we're having a hard time getting people to understand that we have to build a lot more in certain areas. Well, now that we've made a lot of areas likely off limits to building, now we should be able to tell folks, now you really have no choice. The areas where there's transit, the areas that already have some density, the infill development, we've got to move faster in those areas where we know it's possible and safe, the downtowns, the conversions. Otherwise, we're just going to get even further from where we know we have to be. So it's a combination of addressing the short-term immediate problems that continue to stack up, but then also see within that the opportunities of how it could present to us some urgency or some insight or some possibilities that wouldn't otherwise be there, and that was already a kind of a roadblock we were facing. And that's that, you know, the issue of insurance, for example, or areas that are now off limit for building. These are things that are, I think, front and center. But if we just saw the challenge, we would just get further and further from where we need to go. And we can't accept that because we are already, I think, super far from where California needs to be in terms of housing affordability.
Yes, these parallel issues of homeowners insurance and housing affordability and the rising cost of homeowners insurance related to everything you're talking about. It's quite a conundrum for the people of the state of California and for policymakers to try to sort out. And it remains something I think that will continue to be really high profile. And as you mentioned, the continuing presence of fire as a threat to the state of California and how we deal with that, both in building housing and ensuring the housing that is built. Very, very complicated stuff. Yes.
It was hard to get insurance in many parts of the state before these fires. Part of the crisis that we faced before the fires was that huge parts of our state insurance companies had pulled out altogether. You just couldn't get insured there. In fact, the area around the Palisades in Malibu, a lot of the folks there either didn't have insurance or they had the public insurance, the Cal Fair plan, which that plan didn't fully cover a lot of the losses, and we've now got to find ways to provide more support for that program because we're going to have a lot more people that are going to have to go on, and it's going to have to cover potentially more losses in the future, including the ones that we've already experienced.
Yes, yes, it is a complex situation for sure. You had mentioned earlier your role as majority whip, and I'm curious about that. What was that like? Can you tell us a little bit about that experience? On crutches, I didn't know, but
you know, it's interesting. We have California is an incredibly diverse place, and getting to know each member and what their district is like and what their concerns are and what issues maybe are a little touchy for them, or what are the big supporters that they who they look to, who they're going to be very sensitive to if they feel strongly about something. I mean, every member has a particular approach on things, and so when you're in leadership and you're trying to understand where votes are going to come down, how to deliver certain votes, you kind of have to understand that. So I also spent time visiting as many districts of my colleagues as I could, traveling the state, meeting with people firsthand in their areas, and building that trust so that I could really try to understand directly where they were coming from. And California, when I was there as this last year, we had 62 Democrats and 18 Republicans. And even with that, you need 41 Democrats for a majority vote, and most of them majority votes. We don't get that on every bill, right? There are some bills where you're losing over 20 Democrats on the vote, and there's close votes, and let alone on bills where you need 2/3. So, and that's 54. So I was working a lot on trying to understand where everyone was and trying to understand how we could get there and helping other members who had bills get there. But it first starts with understanding that every district in our state is different. Everyone has their own set of politics and needs. And the better you can understand that, the more success you're going to have in helping actually get things done on the floor.
Sure, it strikes me that we've come full circle to your experience as a kid, right?
It's like an apartment building, you know. Luckily, I'm not getting beat up over there, but you know, it's a very diverse set of folks. But it's actually as much as politics gets a bad rap, and sometimes it deserves it. And sometimes I watch or I know people who've gone to D.C. and I'm like, why would you want to do that? Like they really do, like they're just fighting all the time, and it looks like a circus or a food fight. They're just, for us, and Ken knows this, like we really try to get things done. We really try to solve problems, and sometimes it's challenging, but people do work together. They work through issues, and I think California, the California State Legislature is, at least from what I've seen, one of the better models of legislative governance in the country. maybe the best in terms of the seriousness, the ways that policies are really vetted, the time we take on it, and the way that we actually do try to get it right and treat each other with respect and have real dialogue around it. It's not just, we just go in our corners and we're all factionalized and you're a moderate and you're a progressive and we don't talk to you. It's very different even in San Francisco, which is a much more brutal political environment. I think Sacramento has a lot to teach other legislative bodies on how to operate.
Sure, that was my experience as well, working in the legislature. I often talk with students about people think D.C. is the place to be, and I personally think that Sacramento is the place to be as far as if you really want to be part of the policy conversation and make real change.
For sure. And then everybody else, the number of bills where we author something and then 10 other states just introduce the exact same bill. Because as you all know, we're one of the few full-time legislatures, only a handful of full-time legislatures in the country. And we have professional staff, both at the committee level and in our offices. So we have great legislative counsel. So the ways in which we take our responsibility as a laboratory for state governance is hugely impactful, not only for the 40 million people who are here, but for all of the states that then literally just copy and paste our bills and introduce it straight off, because they're always looking to what California is doing, and as does the federal government.
Yes.
Few folks are looking at what the federal government's doing and say we want to copy that. That's not really how they operate. It's usually actually what we're doing, and then they copy what we're doing.
Yes. So, any advice or guidance for students who are looking to get involved in policy, maybe run for office someday?
Well, come help us in the Capitol. It's a great place to work. We just talked about how they're finally raising salaries so that they're approaching living wages. Not quite there yet, but it is a great place to work. I think that being an elected official certainly is not for everyone, but if it is attractive to you to have people yell at you and scream at you and tell you to do exactly what they want and share their hopes and their dreams and their pains with you, and then you turn around and however that experience was, you're going to go and fight for them and try to deliver for them, regardless of how they've treated you, and you really feel deeply that you want to be a voice for people who need a voice, and you have something to say. And something you want to accomplish. I think elected office is a great way to do it. I got my start as a school board member, and that was, I think, a really powerful way for me to understand who I was there for and who was relying on me, and what it meant for me to really feel like the thought and the purpose and the intention that I put into my work really was going to have an impact on people's lives and their futures and their kids, and that I took that experience with everything that I've done since. So some people look at it and go, "Why would you ever want to do that?" I love it, and I think it's a huge responsibility. So if that's your calling, go out there and be a part of a community. And earn their trust, earn your role as somebody who they want, who wants to have you represent them, and from that your path will be pretty straightforward.
Can I ask you too? We have students in the audience who are both in our JD program, and also McGeorge has a Master's of Public Policy and Public Administration located here in the law school. And you have both a graduate master's degree and a law degree. How do you feel like those two degrees inform your work, and are they useful in the legislative space?
Yes, for sure. I think that knowing how to do policy analysis, understanding some of those research tools and methods are crucial. Somebody brings up a policy or comes to committee, I can understand how to ask questions like, how do you actually know that this is going to solve the problem? Can I do an analysis based on what other states do? And things that I learned, I think, in public policy, and makes a big difference. But same with your legal background. You really you're not going to be afraid of those conversations where you're really talking about how a certain law will be interpreted, how it will actually be experienced in the real world, what it will mean when whatever law that you wrote or process you're a part of ends up in a court, and how a judge will actually think about that. And then just the way that you think, I think, as an attorney or as a law student is hugely valuable and impactful for policy making and leadership generally. You know how to kind of go through that type of reasoning, whatever's brought in front of you, how to think about that in the context of other laws and other frameworks and principles. And so both are hugely valuable. And for those of you who are doing that, it's good to have options.
Any final thoughts, and then we'll open the floor to questions.
I think Sacramento is a really incredible place to be, and especially right now. We didn't talk much about what's happening at the federal level, but the responsibility that California has to tackle these very, very challenging issues that our residents are facing, I think could not be more important in this moment, to demonstrate that there is another way, that government can work, that we can actually solve problems, that in a state like California, that we do have a way forward that doesn't have to be the brokenness and the craziness and the silliness and the scapegoating and the attacks on people and the division that I think people are unfortunately beginning to identify with politics broadly. We have to save politics and governance from itself, and it's going to be a long process, but I think if it does happen, if we are successful with it, I think it will be because California figured out how to get it right. And we haven't done it yet, but I think if it's going to happen anywhere, it can happen here.
That's a big responsibility and a big opportunity. Yes, both things. So,
not in my time. It's going to happen in your time.
So turning it over to the folks who are going to solve the problems. Do we have any questions for Assemblymember Haney? Yes, Mo.
Thank you for coming tonight. I hope I characterized this correctly, but I read this morning in the California Political Playbook that there's either a plan or they're thinking about taking unleased state-owned land and giving that, or leasing it to nonprofits to develop for affordable housing. Do you think that's a viable option? And you mentioned earlier that, one of the issues with the housing crisis is that this takes time. Do you think that this is something that can be done quickly?
So one of the things that I've tried to focus on since I've been in the legislature and certainly as housing chair is that the state should be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And I think it's pretty clear that when it comes to what has happened in Sacramento, the state has been part of the problem. I think the state of California is probably one of, if not the worst landlord in the entire state of California, which is really shameful considering our responsibility and what we're facing. Sacramento, downtown in particular, has a higher concentration of state office buildings than anything else. Many of those are largely empty, and the impact that has had on Sacramento when these buildings and the state don't pay taxes, if they don't bring people into work, that's hurting the restaurants, it's hurting the small businesses. It's had just a devastating impact on Sacramento. And all across the state, we see similar issues with empty state office buildings and underutilized state land, sometimes Caltrans, other types of surplus land that the state is just holding on to and not answering to anyone about its use. And so I've got a bill. That's not my bill, but that's a really good idea. It should happen. And we're going to be putting this bill forward soon that essentially says that the state has to, if you're not going to use some of these buildings or some of this land, you got to give it up to somebody who will. And we're going to set a percentage of the buildings that they have to give up, not necessarily to housing, but housing would be ideal. But to educational institutions, to UCs, CSUs, community colleges, student housing, arts. I mean, we've got to get people, I work a lot on downtown issues. we got to get people into existing buildings. I mean, it's the most common sense, basic thing ever, and yet we've got these empty buildings and empty land that could be used by folks who need it or would want to use it, that are sitting underutilized, wasting space, wasting energy, and hurting everything around it. So can that happen? Yes. If it's going to happen, it's going to take a lot of pressure, because one of the things about the state as a bureaucracy is it won't necessarily, just like any bureaucracy, it won't necessarily move unless you make it. And on this issue, we have to make it move.
Good question, Mo. Any other questions? Zach and then Griff.
Do I stand? I'll stand. Hi, thank you for taking the time to be here. I had a question. So I know a lot of times homelessness can overlap with the need for supportive services. And so to what extent does your committee work with, for example, a committee on like health or committee on human services? And are you generally, if you do work in sort of a lockstep, or is there some sort of, do you guys quarrel? I'm not sure what that looks like. Thank you.
No, it's a very, very good question, particularly on homelessness. You can't address it solely with housing. You can't address it solely with health. You can, if you provide healthcare services to people who are still on the street, it's going to be pretty hard to keep them healthy and safe. And if you provide housing to folks who are maybe experiencing health challenges or have disabilities or addiction, behavioral health issues, it's going to be challenging for them to be successful solely by just providing them with a key. And we've seen both of those challenges in San Francisco, where I've worked on this firsthand. You know, we have over 10,000 units of supportive housing in San Francisco. Some of those types of supportive housing don't do much for people at all once they get in there. It's supportive in name only, and so they don't have those real health interventions that are required, and people sometimes end up overdosing, end up back on the street. We're not helping them exit entirely so that they can have stability and independence. So it is an area where I'm trying to bring more of a health lens to how we think about housing, and as you said, working on some of these issues that are health related. Sometimes we have bills that are double referred so that they would go to each of the committees, but housing bills, particularly those relate to homelessness, would just go to housing. And so I'm hoping to bring more of that health focus. This actually was a huge frustration for me when I wasn't chair of housing. Last year, I introduced a bill which relates to having opportunities for recovery housing, what we call drug-free recovery housing. So right now, the state will only fund supportive housing environments that allow drug use. It's the way that we define our housing first policy. And for many people, that's fine. I think it's important to get people off the streets, even if they're still addicted. But for many other people who, let's say, have been through a 6-month treatment program and have been able to get clean and have taken this huge step towards sobriety and are part of a community that is committed to recovery, we have to have supportive housing that is also available to them, not force them into an environment where everyone around them is continuing to use drugs. It's very dangerous. And so I had a bill that, and I have that bill again, reintroduced it because it failed the first time, which sometimes happens, which will allow the state to also fund recovery housing. Seems very common sense, right? The federal government does it, but in California, we don't do it. And it only went to housing. And I was kind of mad that it went to the housing committee because I was saying, this is actually a health issue. Like, if you don't understand this is about treatment and how you provide treatment, you're not going to get this. And if you just look at this through the housing lens, of course, you're just going to say, well, we're just interested in getting people inside. I'm like, well, I'm interested in getting them inside and healthy and happy and stable and alive. And you have to, I think, understand the intersection of those two things if we're going to be successful with something like homelessness.
Thank you for talking to us. My question is, I think it's really wonderful living in California, being a leader in a lot of environmental issues, but oftentimes those, it feels like, come in conflict with streamlining housing development. So I was curious just to hear ideas, thoughts, anything on how we can streamline that process. I'm thinking of what reforms to CEQA can happen, but anything in that space where we can kind of address these two issues head on.
It's a very good question because California has been a leader on environmental protections, and that's a very important role that we have to continue to build on. We have our cap and trade program, which really stands out across the world, especially now we're taking a leadership role on behalf of the whole country internationally on reducing emissions, on renewables, also on conservation. I went and was part of the UN Convention on Biodiversity, where the U.S. is the one country in the world that is not a part of the UN Convention on Biodiversity, and California participates and sends 100 people to the conference and has adopted many of these goals. So we want to protect all of that, but how do we do that in the context of building a lot more housing, I think is a challenge. My view on it is, let's look at the areas where these critical laws really are abused, and there is misuse of CEQA, and I saw it firsthand. Actually the main issue in my race when I ran for the Assembly, which became like the issue that was the defining difference between me and my opponent, was that there was a proposal for a 500-unit housing development on a valet Nordstrom's parking lot right in the heart of San Francisco, 2 blocks from BART, 25% affordable, all union jobs, and it got appealed with CEQA. And despite the fact that our attorneys for the city said there was no CEQA issue, and the supervisor that represented the issue, me, said, I'm good with it, my colleagues overturned the project, voted 8-3, killed the project because of CEQA. There was no CEQA issue. So there are things like that where we can actually protect CEQA by not allowing for things like that to happen, and particularly around infill development in urban areas where there's already density, where there's already growth and such. We shouldn't let CEQA, I think, be abused in that way. But when you're building, of course, and it's sprawl, or it's in areas where there's certain species, or where there's conservation, where there's issues around pollution, where there's other broader issues there, there's a lot that continues to be really important there. But it's like we're talking about areas where there's already tons of housing and tons of buildings and everything, and somebody wants to build in a parking lot, and they say, no, there's an environmental issue here that is a shadow. You can't do this here, and it leads to years of litigation, and you might not be surprised to find out it's often it's folks who are just trying to stop the project that don't want it in any ways, and sometimes it's because it's affordable housing, sometimes it's because it's density in an area where they want to protect what they have. So those are things where I think there is a balance, and we haven't struck the right balance, I think, in California just yet on it.
All right, another question?
Since you said your previous bill failed because people treat it as just a housing issue, not a health issue, how do you go about getting it into the correct committee of health as well as housing for it to be properly treated as a health issue as well?
Well, the first thing I do is I become the housing chair. So now it's different. I get to decide now. The tables have turned. It's a very good question because it wasn't so much that it went to the wrong committee, but that because these issues are being determined by the department that really is focused on housing over and above anything, that the issues that they had with it and the concerns and critiques that they had with it, that they then communicate to the committees and the consultants. So essentially, my bill actually got out of the Assembly. You all know how crazy this aspect of the process is. Bill gets out of committee, gets out of appropriations in Assembly, gets out off the Assembly floor essentially with unanimous. Republicans, Democrats, everybody supported this bill. Gets out of the policy committee in the Senate, goes to the Senate Appropriations Committee. This bill didn't cost much money at all. It's just allowing for existing money to also go to this other type of housing. And the bill dies in Senate Appropriations Committee, and nobody even tells you why. Like, people would ask, well, why did it die? It didn't cost that much money. And I don't know the answer to that question. I can only guess. As the legislator whose bill died, I can only guess why it died. And our guess is that the department had issues with the bill. They did not want it, and they communicated that. And the reason why they didn't want it, and this is not just a committee issue, but it's an issue with the governance, is that the way that how they think about housing and affordable housing and supportive housing currently is, it's just the people you get inside the doors and to have a bed, that's our responsibility. And we are not tracking or looking closely at what happens to them once they're in there. We don't want to have to think about questions about like what type of care they're receiving or what type of services and what happens if they don't follow the rules and things. They don't really want to go there. They just are focused on the number of people that we can get into affordable housing and how many units. And so they're not really asking the health questions. And so this is also an issue, I think, with how we think about homelessness and how we think about problems that really do have these intersections, and what happens when somebody within a bureaucracy simply says, I don't want to have to look at something differently or ask a different set of questions or have to change the way we do things just to be able to deal with this. But what's the result of that? Real people now are being failed because we're not providing them with opportunities and options that most of us would view as common sense. If you're in recovery and if you've gotten off of a deadly drug like fentanyl and you want to continue that path, why on earth would we put you only option we can even possibly give you is to go in an environment where not only is drug use allowed, but you're not in a community of recovery that has helped you get to where you are to begin with. That's more what this is about. It's not about zero tolerance drug use. Most people that get off of a drug like fentanyl, you need people helping you out with that. And you need people holding you accountable. You need health responses, and folks should be able to have access to that, or we're going to continue to have the huge problems that we have right now.
Okay, Ken? And
I actually want to just make a remark. Matt is a tremendous member. But as you were sitting here at this Capital Center for Law and Public Policy, the things to reflect upon is that way back before the Republic, when they were arguing about the U.S. Constitution, Alexander Hamilton, in his first Federalist paper, said the big question that the whole globe was trying to figure out is, can people govern themselves and not just have it left to force and random events? And in the last month, we were reminded that that is the question still. And so, Matt Haney talking about the importance of California nationally, the opportunity to come here and learn as a student how to be effectual in the Capitol. Part of what he's describing there is the adverse effect of term limits, which mowed down expertise among the members. So to aspire to come in and be a student and start learning early about the institution and its ways and its traditions and its potential and the inherent power of the people's branch of government, so that when you actually go to work there, you can be a more helpful staff to help your member from day one, like an exceptional member like Matt Haney, have more like 7-league boots to begin with. Mm-hmm. Because this relationship with the executive branch is not how it used to be. Mm. The executive branch has figured out term-limited members, we can just wait them out, assert our interests, whisper in a few years, throw some dust in the air, and then things are over. So I think, really, tremendous conversation, but I think it highlights the significance of this program within democracy, not just in California, but really globally.
Well, I agree with that. I think that a lot of members, we have 12 years potentially, and if you come in and everybody's sort of learning things when they get there, and they have staff also that are new who are learning things that are, you're able to be taken advantage of, or there's always a moving goalpost there, either put by committee staff or the administration, more likely the bureaucracy that we really need to address some of these issues. So that makes it hard for us to have the level of impact. But I do. The other thing you said that's also very important is the way that we figure out how to get this right, I think, is the most important form of resistance to the awful direction that we've seen governance go at the national level. And that to me is how I think about my job also, is that just trying to figure this out, to work together, to think about the policy, to solve these problems. That's how we show that politics and governance is not totally broken, because that's what most people think right now. And that's how you get what we have in Washington, I think. And I'm not talking about just Trump and all that. People think that Congress does nothing. I watch Congress and I'm like, both parties. I'm like, what are these people doing? I think and people have no faith in their government right now. And so then people they're fine to have it be like Hulk Hogan and, just like whatever wild, silly season it is, because who cares? It doesn't do anything for me anyways. It doesn't matter anyways. These people are all corrupt. None of them are serious. None of them really care about me. And as long as they think that, like, we're screwed wherever we are. That's the fundamental problem we have. Our fundamental problem isn't what is happening in Washington, whether you're for Trump or against Trump, or it's not him. It's that people have just stopped believing in any of this. And if it's going to be entertainment, then fine. I don't care, because I don't trust these people. I don't believe in them. None of it works for me. And we have to figure out how to confront that. We have to actually really do our jobs and listen to people and solve problems. And that's how we're going to work our way out of this. If not, but it was the issue that from the beginning of time for our democracy, they tried to design it so we would have to confront these issues and have to be responsive and have to try to actually get things done. And so it's I think, the challenge that we face in California, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that as well.
Thank you. I think we had right here.
Sarah's had her hand up.
Oh, and then we also had a question over here. Yes.
So along those lines of how do you have those difficult conversations, and this is a process question, of like with your allies who maybe you need to have tough, difficult conversations about, like with labor, that this is, maybe we can't do the wages the way we need to, or with environmental groups that maybe the goals aren't the same, or just that because it's a Gordian knot with housing, all of these problems, and it just seems like the more you pull at it, and it's been so systemic, how do you have these tough conversations with all the different parties to solve these problems? And it's the same with fentanyl or with any of these things. How do you have those to solve a problem?
Well, I try to approach it just like I would with any of my colleagues, which is to really understand what their interests are and what they want, and what they're responsive to. So, if it's labor, understanding who their members are and what their members are demanding and what their members want to see them deliver on as their representatives, and being able to speak that language and really deeply understand that, not just come in and say, this is how it's going to be because of this, but showing that you do have a deep understanding of where they're coming from and what their goals are and how you're going to help them achieve it. I think that there's a lot of understanding for that, and I think it's a benefit of having this very sophisticated Capitol community, that for the folks who are there, the lobbyists, the interest groups and such, they understand how all of this works. They understand the politics of it and the different roadblocks and everything. So it's actually been refreshing that I feel like I can have those conversations. Sometimes it's when you have it with your colleagues, you have to both understand where they're coming from, what they want, and also who got them elected and who wrote them a lot of checks and what they're running for next. And every legislator, we're like an organizer in our own way. and you're trying to build the coalition, and you're trying to get, if you can't get these folks, you try to get these folks and put it all together. So, I feel like we can have honest conversations. Sometimes they're not just policy conversations, they're political conversations. But sometimes those political conversations have to do with where people come from and who they represent and who's important in their communities and what gets us elected or reelected. So, that we do have those conversations, and we just have to be able to, navigate them and leverage them to try to get to where we need to be. But there is a lot of opportunity for dialogue and even for consensus on a lot of issues. And I do think that generally we try to work things out, not have things just blow up.
If I can pull you in a different direction for a little bit, what do you think how do you think the budget's going to play out in the next few months? Given that January we had a balanced budget, then we have fires, maybe revised not out yet, but we know what's going to happen. How do you think those negotiations are going to play out?
So I've been elected for 12 or 13 years now, and I'm going to knock on something. I hope I really don't jinx it here, but I now, from school board to board of supervisors and I was the budget chair at the school district and at the city and county, San Francisco, and I always feel like, the first budget that they put out is always a lot more pessimistic and a lot more scaled back than what usually comes the second round, because they don't want to set themselves up. So, of course, the governor is going to put out something in January where he's showing a lot of cuts that then he gets to sort of back down from and restore. And that's, so usually I expect a slightly more positive thing to come forward in May. The big difference here, though, the uncertainty, of course, is we don't really know what the federal government's going to do yet. So if they blow a huge hole through our budget, that's a different question. We don't really know that yet. Similar question, the fires really happen after, at least the impact on the budget really happened after. So we don't know yet how that's going to be addressed and how much we're going to be able to rely on the federal government. So I would think that we'd be looking at a slightly more positive situation generally than what we saw in January. And what we saw in January was more positive than what he said last year. So we were trending more positive. Last year we were told there was a huge deficit. January, all of a sudden, not a deficit. Still some cuts proposed. And then now May, we'll see. So I think there's reason to be optimistic. I think the wild card, of course, is what is, how serious is Trump and the federal government on really targeting California, and will we see some big hits to essential programs? And if so, how can we backfill those? And then this question of the fires. I mean, hundreds of billions of dollars potentially in terms of losses and damages. Obviously, not only for the state's not going to pay for all that, but a lot that the state will have to pay for. And we're expecting a lot from the federal government, but it is going to have some cost for us. So I don't yet know how that's going to work itself out.
That is something I think a lot of us are trying to figure out. We have time for one last question. Josh?
Thanks for joining everyone this evening. When you're interviewing for your staff, what characteristics or qualities do you look for in those that want to come work for you?
That's great. And I should say I have one of my staff members here, Haney, who's one of the newer members of our team and just doing an extraordinary job. She staffs me on housing and also on the downtown recovery work, and so has her hands full with a lot of things. I would say I look for people who are resourceful and really can sort of figure out how to solve problems and know how to kind of get questions answered, and not just like for us. Like I come up with some crazy ideas sometimes. I'm like, like I said, I think half of the state buildings should be turned into housing or campuses or something. Annie, how do we do that? And so, it's her job in that case to go and talk to all these different folks, figure out what the kind of angle of it might be, figure out what maybe some other places did, and not just kind of accept no as an answer, or say that's crazy, or just hit a roadblock and say I'm stopping here. like, I really think it's important to always find a way to something and navigate through that. And so people who have had that, who have that characteristic or who want to learn how to do that is what we're looking for. And, and have that be reflected in their set of experiences. It's not, I wouldn't look for a certain degree or a certain, job title or something like that. It's more on how you go about your work. Of course, a passion and a commitment and a set of values that is consistent with my approach and an alignment on that is also critical. But then just a desire to, sometimes we just we're trying to do something crazy, something different, and let's figure it out. One thing that I'll say for me, and maybe this is a good way to close here, I don't think about my role as a legislator as solely about the number of laws that I pass and just getting a law passed. This is not, that's great. Who knows if anybody ever follows that law sometimes, what impact an individual law will have. I hope it has a lot of impact, but that's not how I would measure things, and I talk to my staff a lot about this. We also have a responsibility in everything we do to change the dynamics of power and who has it and who has a seat at the table. And if we can do things that give some people some access to power or some seat at the table with the laws that we pass so that they can speak for themselves and actualize their own rights or their own opportunities, that's maybe the most powerful thing that we can do as legislators, to change the dynamic somehow so that we're giving power to people in our society who should have more of it. And sometimes what we're doing is simply changing the conversation or the understanding or the consciousness either in the legislature or more broadly so that different types of things are possible. So we did a crazy bill called Right to Disconnect, which was essentially that people should have some amount of time where their bosses shouldn't be contacting them and that they're off and that they can rest or be with their families. It was like the biggest bill that we did that got more press. It was national. It was on CNN and everything. And the bill got out of one committee and it died. And I kind of knew it was not going to go anywhere. But I think that the conversations that it initiated will have many ripple effects, not only in the legislature, but much beyond, where companies are now thinking about this, bosses are thinking about it, employees are thinking about it. And this issue that is a real issue that people are experiencing and facing is one that is not quite ready to be fixed with a law. But as a legislator, I have the ability to amplify it and bring light to this experience that people are having where they have no time to shut off and have no time to themselves. That I think will bring about change. And so thinking about our roles as legislators and your roles if you work in the Capitol as, yes, we pass laws, but we do so much more than that. And our responsibility is much, much greater than that. So I hope you do continue to spend your time in the Capitol either while you're here or beyond. And it was an honor to be here. And
Thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you for your candor and your experience. We really appreciate it. Yes. And your time. What a gift. Yes.
Yeah, of course.